Let me tell you a story. So 5 years ago, I'm seated in class thinking what normal children think in math class, right? Thinking about some numbers and stuff. And so I'm seated there wondering what the answer is to the next question. And then suddenly my friend walks up to me and then tells me our SAT results are out. And so I actually expected to fail because those were one of the hardest exams I've ever sat for. And then he tells me that he's seen my score, and then my score was a 1,245. And then for those who do not know what that means or how good of a score that is, when you have a 1,245, at least above 1,240, that means you've scored in the 80th percentile. And that was a very good grade, and it could guarantee me a very good place in an American university. And so when I received that news, the first thing I remember is how my heart started to race. To a point, it felt like my sight was blurry because I did not believe what I had just heard. And then I started to smile. And so why am I telling you that story? Because today we'll be talking about emotions. So what do we mean when we say emotions? So what I experienced that day was the emotion of joy or the emotion of happiness. And so we'll dive deep as to what that means. So when we talk about emotions, the word emotion itself comes from a Latin word emovere, which means to stir up, to agitate, or to excite, right? And so what is an emotion itself? I like this definition by Maurice, 1979. He said, an emotion is a complex, effective experience that involves diffuse physiological changes and can be expressed overtly in characteristic patterns of behavior. I know that sounds very complicated, and so to make it up to you, I'll give you a very simple definition. An emotion is the stirred up state of an organism. And so what are some of the characteristics of emotions? One, they're usually intense. And then two, they're usually short-lived. They last for a short amount of time. And then three, they usually have a specific cause. And then they're usually directed towards a specific thing, right? And then they motivate us to behave a particular way. And that's why we're studying them right now. And then lastly, they are universally expressed, meaning regardless of the race, regardless of the nationality of the particular group of people, they all seem to have the same basic emotions. So how many emotions are there? There are a lot of emotions. However, Ekman believed that there are only 6 basic emotions which are of importance. So these will include emotions like surprise, happiness, sadness, anger, fear, and lastly, disgust. So when you talk about emotions, it's important for you to know the components of emotions. And so before you could feel happy, right? Or before you could feel sad, or before you could feel angry, there are 3 things you need to know about emotions, or 3 components to an emotion. One, we have the subjective experience. So the subjective experience refers to how a particular individual subjectively feels about a particular stimuli that is presented with. For example, suppose you're walking in the night and then you suddenly hear a sound, right? If you feel that that sound is scary, for example, you choose to run, right? That's subjective. It's up to you. You could run. Others could decide to man up and face back and try to face whatever made that sound, right? Others could freeze. All these are subjective experiences. The next thing is the physiological arousal. So the physiological arousal refers to the summation of the physiological processes occurring in our body. So this could include things like changes in the chemical composition of our body, neurotransmitters, things like serotonin, things like dopamine, and then all these things are eliciting physiological reactions that can cause us to sweat, that can cause our hearts to beat much faster, that can cause us to shiver, to tremble. All these are physiological arousal, physiological processes. And lastly, we have a behavioral or an expressive component. So the behavioral expressive component refers to what you do in response to all this, right? So what are we saying? subjective experience, physiological arousal, and then we have a behavioral component, right? And so let's discuss some of the theories related with emotions. The first theory I'll discuss is the common sense theory. So let's use an analogy to express this one. We say when you see a lion, right? That's the stimulus. You feel afraid, right? That's the emotion. And then you run, right? Then as you are running, your heart is also racing, right? So the physiological arousal is also there. What's wrong with this? So everyone would agree that this makes perfect sense, right? However, James William and Carl Lange argued and said this was wrong. And so what they said is that instead, when you receive stimulus, which is seeing the lion, physiological arousal is what is going to cause you to experience an emotion. In other words, you see the lion, you run, your heart beats much faster, adrenaline is secreted into your system, and then you experience an emotion, which is fear, right? And so that's what James Lange's theory says. And so this theory faced some criticism, firstly because it is possible for you to have a physical arousal without having an emotion. For example, you could sweat, but the fact that you're sweating does not mean you will be scared, right? You could sweat because it's hot, right? And so this is why James Lange's theory does not really hold up. And so someone decided to come up with their own theory. So we have the Cannon-Bard theory. So in the Cannon-Bard theory, we say when you receive the stimulus, which is seeing the lion, right? Your subjective experience, your physiological arousal, right? And then the emotion happen at the same time. And so this was a clever way of fixing the problem with James Lange's theory. And so what they're saying is that when you see the lion, you run. But at the same time, as you are running, you're also being afraid, right? You're also feeling. But then one thing you'll be able to see is all the theories I've discussed here have one common problem. And the problem is that an arousal can give you a variety of emotions. For example, if the physiological arousal is your heart beating faster because of adrenaline, one thing you'll be able to see is that whenever your heart is beating fast because of adrenaline, the emotion experience could be fear, it could be anger, it could be joy, it could be surprise. There's so many emotions associated with an increased heart rate. And so in order to fix that, there's another theory called the Singer-Schachter theory. In some context, they'll call it the two-factor theory. And so according to the two-factor theory, when you receive that stimulus, you experience physiological arousal. And then when you experience that physiological arousal, it's up to you to establish a cognitive label about that stimulus. And then after you establish that cognitive label, you experience the emotion. So this emphasizes that there are two factors which are essential. One, the physiological arousal, and then the cognitive label of that physiological arousal. So this one makes sense. You see the lion, and then you experience a physiological arousal, which is your heart racing. And then the fact that your heart is racing, your mind or your brain will wonder, my heart is racing. Then why is it racing? It's because of the lion, okay? If it's because of the lion, let me be afraid, right? And so that's the two-factor theory. And then lastly, we have the Lazarus cognitive appraisal theory. And so the Lazarus cognitive appraisal theory is similar to the two-factor theory, but let me explain. So what we're saying is, one, you receive the stimulus. When you receive that stimulus, two, you establish a cognitive label first. And then after you establish that cognitive label, you can have two things happening simultaneously. One, you can have the emotion, which can be fear, or you can have the arousal, which can be your heart beating fast. Let me give you an analogy using the lion thing. So you see the lion. After you see the lion, your brain will establish a cognitive label, and then it will say, oh, that's a lion. And then once you see that that's a lion, that's the appraisal. And then you experience an emotion, which is fear. And then at the same time as you're experiencing that emotion, which is fear, you also experience a physiological arousal. And then if you had to ask me, I would say this one would be my favorite amongst all the theories we've discussed. And so that will mark the end of emotions. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to subscribe and like And then also, if you have any videos you would like to see, you can say that in the comments and I'll be able to do the needful. We'll see you in the next video.